Hello, class. Nice to see you again. We're in week 7. We're getting close to the end, and my beard is getting longer by the week. I need to get rid of that soon. Anyway, this week we're talking about the world, one of my favorite topics. There's a lot there on Descartes, Locke, John Locke in particular, a very famous English philosopher known to have basically pioneered what's called empiricism, which is the basis for the modern scientific method that all of reality is nothing but the five sense impressions. There's quite a bit on Immanuel Kant, or sometimes called Kant, the way you pronounce it, is based on what country you're in. Americans call him Kant. Brits call him Kant. He's extremely important in modern philosophy, and then there's a few gestures, here to 20th century philosophers like Wittgenstein. So this week on the world, let me just highlight very quickly. I'll let you do the reading. Do most of the reading if you can, especially the bits on Locke and Kant. There's a bit on the end you could skip if you need to. But what I want to talk about are the two major camps on the world, philosophical conceptions of the world that have dominated philosophy since Plato and Aristotle, all the way up through the medieval period, from Descartes to the present. This issue is probably at the very heart of philosophy. I'm writing a book, or trying to, that will deal with the world, and it's a fascinating topic. There's so much literature, recent literature in the last 20 or 30 years on the world and worldhood, as it's called. And so the world, how we understand the world, is divided into two main trajectories or camps. One of them is called realism, and it can go by various names, but we'll just call it realism. That's the simplest one. And the other one is idealism. Okay, so they're two isms, and they're the polar opposite of each other. So realism is what most of us probably by instinct adopt, and I think it's wrong personally. But realism is simply this: that the world is a freestanding object that is entirely independent of our mind and body, and that when we want to discover the world out there, we have to hook onto it with our concepts in our brain. Our embodied mind has to conform to it. And we can slowly but surely unveil the world as it is through scientific study and philosophical analysis. Okay, but the world is not dependent on us at all. It is clearly outside of us and there. And we behold it as something that we need to measure as it is in itself, and that's it. Okay, so that's realism. The world is real, empirically. Okay, idealism is a little bit counterintuitive, but I think philosophers say it's less naive. It's more of a critical way of seeing how the world actually is to us. And idealism says there is no such thing as a world in itself, freestanding. The world is rather a product of our interpretations. It's something that the mind produces through its imagined, embodied, linguistic engagement with the world around us. We actually give rise to the world. We yield it forth as a product of culture. And so the world is something that we construct and unfold and develop and refine and give shape to over the centuries. And we are the origin of the world. It is a subjective human phenomenon. Now that might sound like, oh, that's extreme relativism, or maybe there's many worlds, like 7 billion different worlds, because there's 7 billion people, and everybody constructs or fabricates their own world or manufactures it in their mind. That's not quite what idealism is saying. Idealism might say there's 3 or 4 big worlds. There's probably a Western world, an East Asian world. There might be a pre-modern world and a modern world. So there's a few different ways of seeing culture as producing a large-scale concept of world that many of us will imbibe or adapt. But idealism in Immanuel Kant, okay, is more sophisticated. He kind of cuts the difference between realism that's extreme, that says we don't influence the world at all, And then what you might call subjective idealism, that's on the other extreme, that says there is no real world, we just completely fabricate it. Immanuel Kant says the world produces and gives to us data, lots of sense impressions, lots of data. So there's a world out there. We just don't have access to it. But the world out there, like a big, vending machine, gives us goods and data, and we take it in our mind, and then we construct it into a sensible, organized, coherent unit of thought. And that we're responsible for giving rise to the world as we see it and experience it, but not the world as it really is, because that's just a hodgepodge of data. So we have to give it a kind of organized whole. We have to make our mark. And that's the difference between appearance and reality. So Kant will say we don't actually know the world in itself, what he calls the thing itself. Okay, Saxtum selbst in German, the thing itself. We don't have access to the things themselves, but we have access to how they appear to us. And that's called transcendental idealism, which is kind of seen as a moderate idealism that also says the world is there. It does shape us and influence us, but ultimately it conforms to our mind if it wants to appear at all to us. So that's the big debate about the world. The question will be on the difference between realism and idealism. There's a few pages that are helpful in Blackburn's book. Enjoy the reading, and we're almost there, so finish strong.